On Tuesday, October 16th, 2012, indie game developer and holder of, I think, the coolest game development company name out there, Giant Sparrow, released the light-hearted, quietly quaint, and jaw-droppingly beautiful independent storybook puzzle game, The Unfinished SWAN, to the PS3 PlayStation Store. On Tuesday, October 16th, 2012, I was probably sitting in school thinking that my 6-inch tall sea urchin hair looked even better than my thick, bright red glasses, wearing no less than 2 t-shirts in tandem with my black combat boots, perfectly and specifically laced so tight to my feet that even if I fell out of an airplane, those boots would still be attached to me. You know, this is the second time on this channel that I've mentioned my outfit choices in the early 2010s, and the first time I was really, really embarrassed by it, but this time I'm kind of proud of it. Hello, Internet. How are you? Welcome to a channel where I am saying goodbye to video games. And by saying goodbye to video games, I mean that I am creating a video essay for every game I own, meticulously going through every detail so that I can say goodbye to each and every game with you. Today, we find ourselves saying goodbye to The Unfinished SWAN. And listen, The Unfinished SWAN is a genuine certified hood classic. You're gonna hear about how much I love this game because I'm going to mention I love this game a lot. Like, probably every 2 minutes. And I don't like to make blanket statements, famous last words I know, but this is the best way I can describe the game. This game is great and beautiful and lovely, and it hurts my actual soul. This game is so delightful that it fills me with real-world pain. This game is so poignant and charming and inspired that I think I might actually have a hernia just saying these words to you right now. Giant Sparrow, the small but dedicated company who created this game, was created for the sole purpose of creating this game. I hope that sentence made as much sense as I wanted it to. The founding members conceived of an idea for a game where you, as the player, reveal the world around you by splashing paint. This idea eventually made its way to Sony, who had Santa Monica Studios, that Santa Monica Studios, help with the game's development and make sure the game came to fruition. To say the absolute very least, I think they did a great job. To say a little bit more than the absolute very least, I think that the true and real shame of The Unfinished SWAN is that it's a hidden gem. I may be wrong, it definitely won't be the first time, and I promise it won't be the last, but I'd wager that there are less than 10 video essays on The Unfinished SWAN in the whole realm of YouTube. I mean, the most I could find anyone mentioning The Unfinished SWAN in a video was when Chazington mentioned it in his video about PlayStation All-Stars, the PlayStation Smash Bros. Clone that never really came to fruition, and apparently The Unfinished SWAN was in the PlayStation All-Stars 1 and only DLC.
Mr. Daniel did get a medieval stage in the DLC, and it gets invaded by some random paint game nobody has ever played.
I both agree and disagree with you, Mr. Chazington, because this indeed is some random paint game. But it's not a random paint game nobody has ever played. I bring all of this up only to say that I hope somebody, anybody, everybody who watches this video who hasn't heard of this game plays it because of this video. Because if I can share this little piece of weird paint beauty with a little piece of the world, then I can lay my TV head down at night and say that I did something. Usually I just cry though. Usually it's just me. It's just me. Sleeping and crying. It messes with the circuitry in my head. You know, it's wet and then it sparks and fire hazard. So dumb. I had first heard of The Unfinished SWAN on June 23rd, 2015. How and why do I remember this date so specifically, you ask? Well, thank you for asking, and I promise that the answer isn't really embarrassing. I remember that specific date because that is the date that The Unfinished SWAN showed up as number 6 on Watch Mojo's video for the top 10 most artistic games. And there may or may not be a few more games from that video in my video game catalog, but you didn't hear that from me. Also, for the folks counting at home, this is now the 4th time that I've mentioned Watch Mojo on my channel. They were a shockingly large part of my artistic development. If they weren't there, I wouldn't be here. So take that for what it is. The Unfinished Swan only takes up about 97 words over the span of 50 seconds in this top 10 list. But in that short amount of time, this game grabbed me. After seeing the footage that the French-Canadian ranking company had shown, I knew that I wanted to play this game. Perhaps needed to play this game. But sadly, and mostly because of the lack of committing to myself to anything, it wouldn't happen until May 11th, 2021 that I would actually purchase this game, and it wouldn't be until much later that I would actually play this game. And that playthrough was short-lived. But I don't think that just because your history with something isn't long doesn't mean that it can't be profound. The Unfinished Swan is about so much while being about so little. This game gives so much and asks nothing in return. This game is a great juxtaposition of the unbalance that is creation and the loneliness that can come from it. This game offers us so much beautiful scenery and dynamic characters and memorable moments, but what all of these elements mix to are to tell us a story of tragedy. This game shows us what once was, but this game isn't about nostalgia. It's about reflection. Nostalgia is the want for things to be how we remember them, not as they are. The Unfinished Swan is about reflecting on the past and the reflection of ourselves through what we create. The Unfinished Swan is a game about the act of creation, and in its underbelly lays a beautiful melancholy that can only be described as inevitable, because no matter how much you love something, and no matter how much you think it's yours, you will always have to say goodbye. While exploring and saying goodbye to this game, I kept thinking about both the damage and the beauty that comes from staring at a blank canvas. How the act of creating in any and all of its forms comes from the non-negotiable and non-refundable destruction and pain. And maybe that's more personal than universal, but in saying goodbye to this game, it has shown me so much more of my creative process than I ever wanted to see, and honestly, way more than I think you want me to share. But if this channel is about anything, it's about saying goodbye and moving forward. And that is what I plan to do, because even if it hurts, we have to let the things we create go, and we have to let them fly away, even if they aren't finished. The Unfinished Swan isn't long. In fact, the game would actually only take about 2 to 3 hours to play on your first playthrough, and maybe 90 minutes in subsequent playthroughs. So why is it so close to my heart? Well, that question will have to be broken up into bite-sized pieces before we can actually digest it. Like how when a baby is getting their teeth in and their mommy has to cut up their chicken nuggies so they don't hurt themselves. In this analogy, I am mommy. The Unfinished Swan's story is both the bread and the butter of what this game has to offer. It is as much of an interactive storybook as it is a first-person shooter puzzle platformer. I will unpack a little bit of what this game is later on, but for right now, let's just get back to that buttered bread. The story of the Unfinished Swan unfolds in front of us in many different ways. In the form of a storybook, in the form of cutscenes, and even in the form of collectibles. But despite these mixtures in methods, the game is presenting itself as a children's storybook through and through. The main menu screen is a book cover that we have to open in order to start the game. The game's sections are broken up into chapters, and all the aforementioned flavor text collectibles are shown to us as pages throughout the world. All of these elements prove to us that the hero we're controlling is traveling and adventuring through a book. Speaking of the hero we're controlling, we are playing and painting through this game as a young boy named Monroe. Monroe is another first-person protagonist who only speaks in sighs. And honestly, the only thing we really know about him is that he's a boy with no parents, and he wields a magical paintbrush. And both of those facts are said to us in the first 2 minutes of this game. I think that the active choice to make Monroe silent is to keep us, the audience, as close to Monroe as possible. It reminds me of Dr. Seuss's main characters in a lot of his stories, because they're Usually just miscellaneous children who happen to stumble into magical scenarios. And that's exactly what Monroe is, and that's exactly what we are. So without further ado, let's dive into the story of the unfinished swan. The game literally opens with the narrator delivering one of the biggest personal attacks I've ever projected myself onto.
Monroe's mother had always been much better at starting things than finishing them.
This narrator explains that a young boy named Monroe has recently lost his mother, and because he grew up with no father, he must now move into an orphanage. However, while alive, Monroe's mother painted over 300 unfinished paintings. The orphanage would only let him keep one, so he decided to keep his mother's favorite, the unfinished swan. One night, he awoke to discover that the unfinished swan had somehow disappeared from the canvas, leaving nothing but yellow footprints that lead to a mysterious door. So, Monroe grabbed his mother's magical paintbrush and ventured through. When entering the room, Monroe finds himself surrounded by nothing until... After using his mother's magical paintbrush to Jackson Pollock his way forward, he finds himself at the gate of a castle. And through this castle gate, Monroe finds himself in a statue garden. And both we and Monroe learn from a giant T on the wall that this castle belongs to a king, referred to simply as the king. And this king was so arrogant that he painted his whole garden white because he believed no color was good enough for it. But this all changed when people started living at the castle. After falling down a hole, we see the swan and chase it to a watchtower, where we find something we haven't seen before: stairs with a shadow. Another T on the wall tells us that the new subjects of the king's kingdom were tired of not being able to see anything while walking around, so the king was forced to paint shadows on all the objects in the kingdom. We venture forth through the castle, where we find the king's workshop, where the king has held many miscellaneous paintings and dioramas of the kingdom. This place has no actual story significance. I just wanted to mention it because it's like one of my favorite rooms in the game. Like look at this place. Wouldn't you just want to hang out here? It's got a loft. Anyway, just outside the king's workshop, we see another castle in the distance surrounded by a massive labyrinth. Our trusty wall T tells us that the king built the labyrinth because he wanted something beautiful to surround the kingdom. However, on brand, the people of the castle hated the labyrinth because, well, they needed to get through a labyrinth just to leave and re-enter the kingdom. That sounds absolutely terrible. Better than Los Angeles traffic, but absolutely terrible. So, to compromise, the king made a magical shortcut. After taking said magical shortcut and climbing up the stairs of the tower, Monroe learns that the king grew fed up with the demanding people of his kingdom, so he set sail to build a new one. Shortly after learning this, Monroe sees the unfinished swan fly into the distance, and lucky for him, there's a hot air balloon right there ready to jump onto. So he does the most logical thing and hops aboard. As Monroe is flying through the clouds and trying to reach the swan, he falls overboard and lands in an ocean. And then he finds himself at the shore of a massive empire, where there's a giant sleeping. But more than just that, Monroe notices a floating ship in the far distance and figures that that could be his ticket to the swan. Monroe soon discovers that in this new empire, his magic paintbrush no longer paints with black, but now with water. Monroe then uses his newfound ability to navigate his way through the city's sewer system and open up a passage to the upper levels. After parkouring his way through the rooftops, Monroe learns that the king didn't really have much luck with these subjects either, because after complaining that there was no place to throw out their trash, the king painted a canal for all the trash his subjects were accumulating. But the canal brought forth a horde of vines that soon started to take over the city. Monroe uses these vines to make his way up the towers and the buildings until he finds himself in the king's palace. From there, Monroe makes his way through the halls and stairways until he finds the sea wall. He looks through a telescope to see that in the far distance is an island. And on this island is a giant monument of the king. And in this giant monument is the real king sleeping in his own monolithic head. Just taking a nap in his own noggin. Monroe continues making his way to the airship, even using a hose to guide the vines in his adventure. But once Monroe finds the airship, he learns that the king, through all his rules and mistakes, had driven all these people away from this new city as well. So, the king wandered off, hoping to start anew. On the airship, Monroe follows the unfinished Swan into a storm, and quite predictably, this causes the ship to crash. Now in complete darkness, Monroe finds himself in a forest with only the distant, massive monument of the king to guide him. With his new paintbrush now back in black, but this being kind of more of a hindrance than a help, Monroe goes into the dark only to discover two things: giant spiders who want to kill him, and glowing light plants that the spiders are afraid of. So, Monroe uses the latter as an advantage against the former, and this leads him to a house. Curiously, Monroe can't access this house due to its lack of stairs. He wanders around till he finds another page that tells him that the king was so tired of kingdoms that he decided to build something that he thought would actually last: a family. With this new goal in mind, the king painted a house and he painted a wife. Monroe walks through a frame and finds himself in what I'm going to call the polygon dimension. Here, instead of painting, Monroe can make shapes that will correspond and affect the other world we were just in. It makes so much more sense in the game. Don't worry about it. Monroe builds some stairs that he can now use to access the house, and while in it, he learns that the king spent a lot of time painting gifts for his wife, except she only ever kept one: a magical silver paintbrush. The king's wife then used this magical brush to paint the creatures of the forest into existence. The king was so preoccupied with making gifts and building up the house that he actually failed to notice that his wife was pregnant. Back in the polygon dimension, Monroe makes a floor for the top level of the house and even builds a pathway up a tower to a nursery, in which he finds a reference to a game we may or may not later see on this channel. You didn't hear that from me. But when he flips back into the game world, he leaves the house to discover that the king's wife left the king right before she was about to give birth, and she only took with her one thing: a painting of a swan she never finished. Monroe then mans a boat and finds himself on the shore of the king's massive monument, which the king only started building after 9 long years of loneliness. But as he was in the middle of building it, his powers started to fade, and he became trapped in his own dream. Through some lemon finagling, the water around the monument starts to rise, and Monroe finds himself frantically climbing up the monument. And after a couple of close calls, Monroe finds the swan and makes it to the head just in the nick of time. And as Monroe enters, the king wakes from his slumber. The king sees Monroe and realizes that he is the boy from his dream. He tells Monroe that he had a dream that started on the night that he left his home as a child. Make a mental note of this for a future video.
In 10 years.
Shut up! After the king leaves his childhood home, he jumps through time and enters his old kingdom to find that his garden, as well as all of his statues, as well as his maze, have all been haphazardly splattered with black paint.
And then the credits appeared.
No joking, no hyperbole. Terry Gilliam saying this line is one of my favorite lines in all of video game history. I love it. Play it one more time, Sam.
And then the credits appeared.
Thank you. The king then sees his second city completely covered in vines and developer names. After a stroll down memory lane, the king then finds himself in the dark forest with the water rising around him, realizing that everything he built to last forever would soon be gone before he is. He then sees himself at his own funeral, with no one there except Monroe. The king sees his monument outside and begins to move towards it. Only with each step, he grows larger and larger, pushing over his monument with ease and seeing his cities painted over. Then, in an instant, he sees the entire universe come to an end, which brings us to now. The king tells us that his work is over, and that he has done all that he can and all that he wants to, and even though he left everything he made unfinished, excuse me. Even though he left everything he made unfinished, he still had fun making it, and he would have made it anyway. The king then gives Monroe his paintbrush, and Monroe uses it to open a door back to his own world. Monroe walks through it, and as he gets home, he does something that would make his mother happy. He finishes the unfinished Swan. I think that in the amount of time that it took me to explain the plot of this game, you could have gotten through at least a chapter and a half. But before we get into what I love, actually address the gripes I have with this game, because I really only have 3, and they all have to do with the story. The first is that things don't really make spatial sense from time to time in the story, because it sometimes feels like we're in a weird M.C. Escher painting. For example, is that another kingdom in the distance, or am I just looking at the kingdom I am in? Am I in like an alternate reality right now, or is this like a metaphor, or like both? This game plays with your sense of space and time, and I don't think it's always for the best, because I think that it hurts the story more than it helps, because you just have to expand your suspension of disbelief a little more than I feel is normally necessary to enjoy this game, or at least I did. Also, I will admit, even though the game is short, the last chapter does drag slightly, especially after your first playthrough. But considering the fact that 99% of people playing this game may not even play it more than once, I don't think that this is really an issue. Also, the audio on the narrator is really quite egregious. As a person who has lived through many audio catastrophes, I have no idea why she sounds like she was recorded on a monophone from 1882, and everyone else is nice and neat and crisp when they speak, but for whatever reason, she is not.
Monroe's mother had always been much better at starting things than finishing them.
I only mention this because it's just the first thing we hear in the game, and it's how we're introduced to the story, and it may be notable. It was definitely notable to me, so audio is important. Believe me. Believe me.
Audio is important.
But beyond that, I don't know where to start with what I love about this story. I think if I were to compress it down into an idea, this story is a journey into childhood. It's a journey into what it feels like to be a child, and what it feels like to have so much wonder and curiosity, but also so much pain and emotion. The story is a magical one and a tragical one. To me, the true beauty is that it pulls no punches in terms of heartbreak, because at the core of this story is loss and pain, but also the beauty that can come from that. Listen, I remember being a child, and I remember seeing the things that adults went through and not understanding the complexities of those issues, but perfectly understanding the emotion that went with them. I remember what it was like to color out of the lines and have a blast learning things that I probably shouldn't have learned, because it made me feel like I understood these completely mysterious ideas. I remember feeling like being a child in and of itself was an incomplete experience. Like I was given a puzzle that didn't have all of its pieces, and I had to wait year by year for the remaining pieces, and some never arrived. Every character presented, and by that I mean all 3 of them, have something they want that they can never have, something that they have to move on from. All 3 of them feel incomplete. They all feel like they're missing a part of themselves. They all feel... You get the idea. And I absolutely respect the game for taking such a nosedive into that feeling of pain, but keeping a sense of wonder throughout. Because in doing that, it lets us unfold the story by seeing this beautiful work of art through our own eyes, letting us climb through and jump and have fun throughout this magical land, but knowing that this world holds a sadness, a darkness. But that doesn't mean that it can't be beautiful. It's like the story itself is almost toying with the idea of pessimism, but is too kind-hearted to fully dive into it. I'd say that this game story is an easy but not simple page turner. It lets us move from one moment to the next, but also lets us feel every single moment in between. And I love how it is almost perfectly married to... You see, when I booted up the unfinished SWAN on my PlayStation 4, remastered from the PlayStation 3, I came in with expectations. Not many expectations, but expectations nonetheless. I expected that I would be cast into a snowstorm as a white rabbit and only have one means of traversal. And I will say, beyond this very inventive gameplay mechanic, the gameplay is simple, like really simple. Now, the game around the gameplay isn't simple, as mentioned in the previous chapter, but both the nitty and the gritty of the gameplay is so simple. You got surfaces, you got paint, make a path. Come on. Oh, that hurt. That hurt my throat a little bit. If there are any game devs in the audience right now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the entirety of the Unfinished Swan can be played with 3 buttons. The shoot button and the move buttons, which are really sticks. But they're sticks that click, which makes it a button. You could actually press any of these buttons on the controller and all they do is just shoot paint. It is the exact central full mechanic of the entire game. But this game is sold as a puzzle game, and I'm not sure when the term walking simulator was coined, but this game definitely doesn't escape from that category entirely. That much can't be said for the next game. Yes, you. Listen, I'll get to you later.
10 years later.
I told you to shut up, Samantha! This game is a puzzle game, and the puzzles we are solving usually have to deal with throwing paint. It's kind of this game's thing. One could argue that a major puzzle in this game is to just find your way around. I have an issue with this look at the game, however, because I think that it's a mechanic, not a puzzle. I'll explain what I mean more in depth in a second, but if you want my definition of a puzzle, refer to the Limbo video. And this game's puzzles really almost aren't. Listen. I know you know what this section is about. I know that you know that this section is about, everybody say it with me, numbers and how to bypass said numbers. Yeah. But this game doesn't have that many numbers. Wait. Don't leave, baby, please. Thank you. I said there wasn't many numbers. That doesn't mean that there are no numbers. There are 14 chapters with 17 subchapters, 19 story-related pages, 64 hidden balloons, 9 unlockable toys, 3 unlockable extras, and 70 pieces of concept art. This game also has little bits of like flavor experience just to make the experience sparkle a little bit more. Like, for example, we have telescopes that show us distant places on the map and little Easter eggs. We have interactive objects that do special little things when you activate them. And there's also just like a bunch of background whatnots to keep us preoccupied while we walk from location to location. Like I said, it's not a lot, but it is something, darn it. And as some cats say, something is better than nothing. So let's dive in. We are going to be going through all of the chapters and all of the collectibles and all of the things in between. So let's get some things out of the way before we get into the play. God, I'm so lame sometimes. I'm so cheesy. As previously mentioned, there are 64 balloons hidden throughout the 4 chapters. Once you unlock the balloons, you can use them to buy toys in the store. The toys range from a balloon radar that lets you know how close you are to any balloon in any level you haven't found yet, or a sniper rifle that makes you shoot the paint harder, faster, better, stronger, which is actually necessary for 2 specific achievements, or a function that lets you stop the spheres in mid-air for some reason, or a function that just lets you clean the entire room. That's nice. Look at that. It's all clean now. Or a gosh darn paint hose, which is exactly as it sounds. They're mostly meant to just kind of play around with, and besides the balloon radar, none of them really affect the game very much. Also, quick mention, you can unlock this game's actual real prototype, and it's really interesting and fun to walk through and experience like this is the origin of this game. It's just really neat stuff. Again, it doesn't really affect the gameplay very much, and I didn't know where to put it, so here it goes. But in order to get any of these, you'll need to find the balloons. I wouldn't say that the balloons themselves are difficult to find, but admittedly, some are very cleverly placed throughout the world, and they'll make you go, "What are you doing in there, you little rascal?" But beyond the occasional chimney balloon, I don't think that they're anything a quick walkthrough won't help. Moving on through the collectibles, there are 19 pages placed throughout the levels. Notice how I said placed and not hidden. I say this because their placement is quite obvious. So obvious because they're part of the story. They are meant to be experienced. I mean, I literally only missed one of them in my first playthrough. I debated even having them in this collectibles section of the gameplay because they are crucial to the story, but they also have a collectible related achievement, so it kind of felt weird not putting them under the collectibles section. So they're kind of like a weird in between, so that's why I mentioned them in the story section and in this section, so do with that information what you will. In Chapter 1, we have 9 balloons and 4 pages. You use black paint with mostly white backgrounds and surroundings. The entirety of the chapter is you splattering paint to find your way and mark things. Occasionally, you'll find interactive little bits in the environment, like feeding fish paintballs, or fun little integratable sections, or overloomingly, terrifyingly beautiful, large, aquadescent creatures that both haunt and delight the player from time to time. We'll talk about Fred later. But level 1 is just a taster of what to come, getting us used to the world and what to expect. And then Chapter 2 takes everything we know and twists it. Chapter 2 is the biggest of the game and definitely has the most meat when it comes to gameplay. We have 20 balloons to find and 7 pages to read. And this time, our black paint has been replaced with water. And by that, I mean our classic black spheres have now been replaced by light baby blue spheres that evaporate shortly after we shoot them from our face. Like quick side note, it legitimately looks and feels like paint or water or whatever is being just shot from the middle of our face. Picture it. Picture a child running through a storybook while shooting paint from their face. It makes this game so much more avant-garde. By the way, my headcanon reason for why we use water in Chapter 2 is that when we landed in the ocean, the magical paintbrush ran out of paint because it's like watercolor. And so now the brush is just filled with water. And so now we're just throwing water. Boom, explanation. There you go. What were we talking about? This newfound aquatic ability seems useless at first because we can no longer use our paint to navigate. However, we hardly need to because Chapter 2 is well shadowed and displayed, and it holds more secrets than we initially think. We now use the water to activate levers around the environment and manipulate bridges and gates. And once we realize the sewers, then we get to climb the towers of the city until we reach the vines. When the vines arrive, they are a new trick up the unfinished SWAN sleeve. Like, oh, silly player, we are much more than just a one-trick pony. We're a 3-trick pony. 3rd trick to be mentioned later. Each of the individual vines has a golden tip at the end that acts as the front and face of the vine. Once this front interacts with the water that we expend, they will extend and follow the water wherever it goes. This includes up walls and on ceilings. But why is this important? It's important because we can now use the vines to climb wherever we need to go, meaning that we can go anywhere. It's actually not true. The game developers put in cracks in the walls and ceilings to limit where the vines can go. They're like bumpers on a bowling alley. Like the only reason they exist is so that we don't break the game and still feel happy about ourselves at the end of the day. Now, come along. I'm not finished. Mommy has more things to say. Beyond the vines, level 2 really doesn't have any more challenging or notable things to cover that we haven't already covered. So let's move ourselves right along to Chapter 3. Chapter 3, in my opinion, is the strangest level in the game. It's the levels where the game designers kind of said, you know what? How about you make the game? We are back to our black paintballs, but they don't really help us much in this level because we are in pitch black nighttime darkness for most of the level. And we have giant spiders that want to kill us. You see, up until this point in the game, it was technically impossible for us to die. If we were to fall off whatever ledge or vine we were climbing on in Chapter 2, we'd just spawn 5 feet from where we fell. But now, we actually have monstrous adversaries who presumably want to eat us. Regardless of their monstrous intentions, if we stay in the dark long enough, we die and have to be respawned at undisclosed checkpoints. And for the record, we never actually see ourselves die by spider. All we see is our screen get progressively more red until we're abruptly taken back to a previous checkpoint. Now, how do we avoid being theoretically eaten by giant spiders in a video game storybook would? Well, thank you for asking. Questions are important. The new element in Chapter 3 is the use of these glowy fruit things. Listen, I don't know what to call these things, and this game is so unknown that it doesn't even have a wiki that I can reference. And usually I'd be all like, the wiki calls them this, but I'm gonna call them this, and so I can't do that now. So I'm just gonna call them the glowy fruit things. You see, these glowy fruit things have two characteristics. The first is that they glow, and the second is that they are fruit. And if you decide that you want to get a little frisky and throw a paintball at them, they double in illumination, meaning they glow more. You throw a paintball at them and they glow. They glow and no spiders. Spiders go away. Come on. After the glowy fruit shows up, the game just kind of becomes finding the next glowy fruit, hitting it, and running away to safety for like 10 minutes. The next bit of Chapter 3, however, is where things get interesting. You see, after the fruit shenanigans, we arrive at the king's house and find that the house has no stairs, and our little baby legs apparently aren't strong enough to just like jump up 4 feet. So we enter the polygon dimension. How does one describe the polygon dimension? Well, you see, after you enter this mysterious frame, it takes you to a brighter world, with your paint now having the ability to create shapes that then can be integrated into the original world, only if they have this dotted border around them, i.e. the stairs. How the mechanic works is that you shoot one ball for the length, another one for the depth, and the third for the height. And bing, bang, boom, you got a third-dimensional shape. This, by the way, is the third trick Giant Sparrow has up their sleeve, if you remember that joke from a little bit ago. And really, this is all the gameplay mechanics the game has to offer. Like I said, the unfinished SWAN isn't complicated. But how about the trophies? Thankfully, they are also not that complicated. This game, man, it really is the game that only gives. Most of the trophies revolve around finishing the chapters and finding all the collectibles, but there is one deviously tricky trophy called Minimalist. To get Minimalist, you have to finish the first part of the first chapter without throwing any paintballs. Well, actually, you can throw 3 paintballs, but throwing none is more dramatic to say, so. This seems really difficult at first, but I got it in like 4 tries, and I watched Mindless Walkthrough's guide on it. He hasn't uploaded a video in like 5 years, so I hope he's gone on to bigger and better things, but his walkthrough is helpful nonetheless. I don't know if I mentioned this, but the unfinished SWAN took me under 5 hours to fully complete. Like, everything. Like, getting the platinum on this game only took 4 hours, 13 minutes, and 22 seconds. The Snyder Cut of Justice League is 4 hours and 2 minutes. All you need to do is turn on the Snyder Cut and then air fry some chicken tenders, and boom, you've completed an entire game. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, but Video Boy, if this game only took you 4 hours to complete, then why haven't you uploaded a video since January? And to that, I say, all right, let's themes it up. Okay, because the unfinished SWAN is so short, and because there are only 3 characters, 4 if we include the giant, but he literally doesn't do anything besides sleep, the themes pop out very clearly, and the artistry of this game is shown fully. Now, but before we get into themes, I just want to say one thing. From here on out, I take this game personally. For the rest of this video, I will be speaking of this game as if it were a direct and personal insult to me, because it is. This game is a solidified, calcified, 2 million-year-old rock hurled right through every single one of my emotional windows. Just so you know, it's about to get real in like 36 seconds. No going back for the both of us. Just a lot of emotions and me saying a bunch of things to the internet that I can't take back. But I mean, I feel like the folks who regularly click on my videos know the deal by now. Like, you guys know that whenever you click on one of these things that you're signing up for a cavalcade of emotional rants that may or may not lead to some sort of something. So here's to hoping that it does. The 3 themes that I can pinpoint in this game are as follows: creativity, loneliness, and feeling incomplete. Like I said, they're really obvious. The game about painting and has unfinished in the title has themes of creative, incomplete loneliness. I told you, this channel was about honesty, not originality. or tact, or timeliness. Creativity. The heaviest fruit fall first. The theme of creativity in The Unfinished Swan is, to me, the largest and most prevalent. The game is itself a creative and innovative venture. All the characters are artists, and all the characters have this bug in them to create. All the characters give something in the game's world life. The king gave life to his kingdoms and literally breathed life into his wife, which, by the way, that creates like a lot of weird and intricate questions. Like, does she have a choice? Anyway, I think the ultimate point is that the king created everything he could have ever wanted, but still it wasn't enough. The mom, or the wife, or I don't exactly know what to call her, she gave life to the forest, and she gave life to us, or rather, Monroe. The queen, I'm gonna call her the queen. The queen is a strong form of humanity in the story because her creativity was much more passive and subtle when compared to the other two characters. She didn't want to make grandiose monuments of success or excess. And from all accounts, all we know about her is that she just wanted to paint. And Monroe, old voiceless protagonist himself, the life he brings to the game is a little more metaphysical and philosophical. The life Monroe brings to the game is through us. Not only from the fact that he runs around and creates a huge mess of the world, therefore breathing life into it, but it's more than that. Through Monroe's eyes, we see this world and this story. And because we see it, we give it life. Art comes alive only when it is seen. If you ask me, which I'm going to assume that you are asking me because you are still watching this video, in order for a piece of art to be finished, it has to be shown. It has to be seen. Art, in whatever form it comes in, from dance, music, painting, sporting, joking, etc., etc., it only can be given life when an outside entity, not being the creator, is shown it. This kind of thought delves into a weirdly simple yet strangely complicated question, which I'm sure you can guess: if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? The same can be asked of a painting. If a painter paints a painting but shows it to no one, does it exist? And my answer to both questions is the same. Yes, it happened, but it wasn't experienced. The tree definitely made a sound by all laws of physics and logic, but the sound wasn't experienced. All it did was happen. The painter did paint a painting, therefore it does exist, but it wasn't given the chance to be experienced by anyone except the creator. Therefore, it was never given life. Creativity is terrifying. The king knew this. He created as long as he lived, and all his pieces were criticized for their impracticality, and all the solutions he made to the problems he created just resulted in more problems. Then, because of this, he isolated himself in a statue of himself. More on that in a second. And the queen could never finish anything. The reason we don't exactly know, but the message is clear. It was easier to start something else than it was to finish what was started. More on that in another second. Monroe is a creative because he's a child. All children are creatives. All children have an imaginative and artistic flair, and it isn't until we grow up and we start seeing ourselves through the eyes of others that we lose that flair because we experience loneliness. Oh, Fred. Hello, my old friend. All the characters in this game experience extreme loneliness, and through that loneliness, it ironically brings them together. As mentioned almost a literal second ago, maybe a few literal seconds ago, the king couldn't escape his loneliness. He created a kingdom that all his subjects despised, and they despised it because the king made the kingdom for himself. And when you invite the world into your art, sadly, it's no longer yours. His subjects hated his choices, and so he left, only to build another kingdom in which all of his subjects hated his choices. So he left, only to get so lonely that he creates his own wife, and then he isolates her until she leaves. Then finally, having felt all of that, the king locks himself in a statue of himself and then creates a slumber so deep that he doesn't want to wake up from it. The king's fatal flaw was self-importance. He believed that his vision was the vision, that the world would love this weird, outlandish idea that he had, but then he opened his doors and they rejected him. So he decided to move further inward, figuratively, until all the pain and rejection forced him inward, literally. I genuinely can't think of a better metaphor for artistic loneliness than creating a giant monument of yourself and then locking yourself in it only to be trapped in a dream. At least he had his pet hippo. The queen was put into this world for one purpose, and that was to love the king by the king. But the king showed his love by making her things instead of spending time with her. So she decided to create a world around her that she wanted until she got pregnant. And the king didn't even notice. And he drove her to leave. And in her art, she couldn't even seem to finish anything. It seemed that the only thing that she truly found the end to was her life. The queen is the least fleshed out character of the entire game. I mean, all we really know about her is that she never finished a painting and that she's dead, which is a very strange thing because she is also the catalyst for the entire story. The unfinished swan is hers. All the characters are in a way another unfinished swan, but the painting is hers. It's like the swan we're chasing throughout this game is our mom. Like, the swan is a literal personification of our mother guiding us to our father. Like, in death, she's trying to cure both our loneliness and our father's. This is complete theoretical speculation, by the way. But I also like to think that the narrator is our mother, but that's neither here nor there. And finally, us. Not Monroe. Monroe is a literal orphan whose mother just died. To say the very least, he is the definition of loneliness. Like, duh. But I mean us, the players of the game, the watchers of this video. We've all met Fred. We've all been lonely. I'll get to Fred in a second, I promise. I'm not a betting man, but I'd be willing to wager that we have all been so lonely it has brought us to the point of creation. Whether we created a journal entry, or we drew a small drawing on our hand, or we started a YouTube channel. I think that the world of the unfinished swan is a world created by Monroe for Monroe. A world that existed before him, but didn't exist until he stepped into it. I know that sounds like it doesn't make a lot of sense, but just hear me out. I think that the world Monroe steps into is a literal manifestation of creativity. Creativity doesn't exist until we create it. But the act of creation is older than literally every person can ever be. We step into creation so that we can make something that feels bigger than ourselves, but it's exactly as big as we are. I think that when talking about loneliness in this game, we have to talk about creation, and we have to talk about feeling incomplete, which brings me to the final theme. Feeling incomplete, the unfinished swan, the unfinished ideas, the unfinished things we all leave to the ether, the feeling we all have that we are not what we want, what we need to be. Oh, dang it.
It shouldn't have ever been called dark matter at all. It's the matter word in the term that's really shouldn't have ever been there from the beginning.
So it wouldn't be matter, even though it...
We don't know what it is. I don't know. I call it Fred.
So, fun fact. I love astrophysics. I love anything to do with astronomy and planets and stars and the universal theories and everything in between. And because of this love, I have grown a fondness for Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. I bring him up only because I want to mention an analogy he frequently uses for dark matter. Briefly and simplistically, dark matter is a force in the universe that has a strong gravitational pull that is seemingly coming from nowhere. It was coined as dark matter in the 1930s, and the name kind of stuck in popular culture. Dr. Tyson argues that it should just be called Fred, because calling it dark matter implies that we know way more about it than we actually do. We don't know if it's dark, we don't know if it's matter, therefore, it makes more sense to just call it Fred. There's this monster in the unfinished SWAN, and it is the most eerie and foreboding yet beautiful creature in the game. It shows up exactly 3 times. The first is at the beginning when it eats a giant frog. The second is when we see it swimming through glass in murky water. And finally, we see it after we open the gates of the sewer system. And each time, it doesn't do anything but swim. And each time, it carries this mysterious force to it. This beautiful, dark force. In the game, it's implied that this monster was created by the king to stop the vines from spreading, but the monster got out of control. I've decided to name him Fred. As long as I can remember, I've felt something pulling me, like this gravity that I can't explain, like this force that pulls me toward it. And the more I'm pulled, the more creative I become, but as it pulls me toward creativity, it also pulls me away from the feelings of safety and comfortability. And I've been trying to fight this force for so long, but whenever I do, I just get hurt. So it feels like my options have always been to either feel safe and not express myself, or get hurt and create. I call this force Fred. Fred is troublesome to understand because the only thing that can be proven about him is that he is there. He is large, so large in fact that he seems peaceful, like the ocean or like a campfire, but also large enough to know that he has the power to tear you apart. This channel took me 3 years to actually start. As in, it took me 3 years to get up the courage to actually start writing, realizing, and editing the ideas that I had. And once I did, I had no idea that it would have gotten to where it is. And comparatively, at the time of writing this, it may not seem like much, but nothing seems like anything when compared to something else. And this, what you're watching, what you're seeing, what you're a part of is more than I ever expected it to be. The reason that it has taken me 4 years to make 4 videos isn't because these videos take a long time to make. They do, but believe me, they do not take a year. The reason that I get asked if I'm dead or not, and I get constantly messaged about when the next video will come out, is because Fred terrifies me. It terrifies me how vulnerable I feel. It terrifies me how much it hurts to write these essays and to make these videos, and it terrifies me that when I publish a video, I feel better than I've ever felt. To create is to bleed. In order for something to be made, it has to be put out into the world, and it has to be thrown into the universe and given its own gravity. And as the creator of said things, it hurts. Oh my God, it hurts so bad. But once it drifts off into wherever you've thrown it, you realize that you've added to the universe. You haven't just taken away, you've given back. At least that's how I feel. I wanted to make this video not only to make a video, but to let everyone who watches these know that I'm not dead, and that I do feel dedicated, and that I'm trying. Oh my good grape God, I'm trying to do better. But I also want to say that these videos are never finished. I don't finish these essays, I just release them. Whenever I sit down to write these, and whenever I sit down to voice them, and whenever I sit down to edit them, they never feel complete. To be honest, they feel like I've just thrown up on a YouTube page with 3 different flavors of stomach acid. But I release them because letting them go feels way better than letting them rot. I'm tired of running from Fred. I'm tired of swimming in a murky tank. I'm tired of letting myself down. And maybe this is too personal. Maybe you listen to this and you think, hey man, I just kind of want you to make more videos. Have you ever thought about therapy? And to that, I say, yeah, I know. And yes, I have. Yeah, I have. But the reason I'm writing this right now, and the reason I'm saying this right now, is because I'm making a promise to you. And I don't just mean you watching, and I don't just mean you, Fred. I mean, I'm making a promise to myself 5 years ago, and a promise to myself 5 years from now, that I'm gonna make more videos, and I'm gonna make them more frequently. I promise that I'll finish these pieces of art, and I promise that I'll put them out into the world, because it doesn't matter how great or how big something is. It doesn't matter how sexy or funny or groundbreaking. It doesn't matter if it's a mess or if it's a legacy. What matters is that I make them so that they can be seen. Because when they're seen is only when they're finished. The Unfinished Swan is a game about feeling incomplete. It's a game that forces you to become an artist, even if only for a little bit. It forces you to feel what it's like as a child, just having fun and making a mess. In this game, you are chasing this elusive, unfinished work that you never end up catching. But while you are chasing it, you go on an adventure and you get to experience these beautiful moments that you would never have seen if you never started. It's almost like your pain has given you the opportunity to create something that has never been made before. Every single playthrough of The Unfinished Swan will look different because none of us throw paint the same. The end of this game feels so powerful to me because we choose to finish the work we leave behind. Monroe wanted to be closer to his mother, so he finished The Unfinished Swan. I want to feel closer to myself, so I'm finishing this video. So here it is, an unfinished essay by an unfinished essayist on The Unfinished Swan. I think we're all ready to say goodbye. Dear The Unfinished Swan, I do not appreciate how honest you have made me. I don't appreciate that you have opened up my soul to the internet so that now I can be held accountable to my own promises. Thanks a lot for that. Now, question, were you simply just a vehicle to get a video out and also give me a chance to explain why I disappear and reappear seemingly at will? Maybe. Does that take away from your beauty? No, it definitely does not. Unfinished Swan, I hope that in saying goodbye to you, I say goodbye to this habit of fear I have fallen into. This terrible ritual I have found myself in. This labyrinth that seemingly has infinite exits. Thank you for giving me the strength, or at least the hope, in destroying that. I'm gonna miss how weird you are. I'm gonna miss the mess that we made together, and I'm gonna miss how fun it was to paint in your world. But I think that the point of art is to express yourself, and I think that expression is a mess, and so I thank you for that. Believe me, if writing this essay has screamed anything out at me, it is that expression is a mess, but that is okay. Dear Unfinished Swan, I hope that in me saying goodbye to you, other people say hello. I hope that when I leave the door open for other people to see what you are all about and get to experience and appreciate you for all that you have. And I hope that you treat them as well as you've treated me. Unfinished Swan, thank you for being artistic. Thank you for making me smile. And thank you for everything. I will not forget you anytime soon. Thank you for the mess. Just a Video Boy. So that's the unfinished Swan. This game is a very interesting specimen. I was really happy and also terrified that this game was chosen by my patrons via a secret poll. Speaking of patrons, look at all of these amazing people. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Also, if you want to hear me answer any questions, you can go over and ask me them on Patreon. Speaking of questions, were there any YouTubers or anyone else that inspired you to start your channel? What motivated you to start the Just a Video Boy channel? Oh yeah. I mean, I honestly wouldn't have started this channel if it wasn't specifically for Action Buttons Tokimeki Memorial Review, because that video really kind of opened the door to my mind of what I wanted this channel to be. I'm also just a super huge fan of video essayists in general. Like, I've loved Super Eye Patch Wolf forever. I love Iron Pineapple's work. I think that all Nakey Jakey's videos are masterpieces. I really just think that I'm a super big fan of the genre. And as for the second part of that question, what motivated me to quit video games was to quit video games. Genuinely. I wanted to make a channel about saying goodbye, and I wanted to do it in a way that felt fun and exciting, and I hope that I have achieved that in some way. What is the first game you remember playing, or like the first game you really felt had an impact on you? Oh boy. I remember playing the old Sega games with my brother when I was like 3 or 4 years old, but the first time I ever remember a game having a really huge impact on me was Wii Sports. Like, I couldn't get enough of Wii Sports when my family first got a Wii. And I still remember just grinding that game to the ground because I loved it so much. I don't know if this counts as a favorite game question, but what game genres do you like? I don't know. I don't know if I have one game genre I like over the others. It's much more about the game than the genre for me. Like, I feel like if you play a great game, then it doesn't really matter what genre it is, you know? But that's a specifically me answer. That is I know that is not a general opinion. That's just how I feel about it. If you could be any main character from any game ever, who would you choose and why? Okay, I'm gonna take this question and spin it around a little bit. I'm only going to consider the game characters of games that I've already covered on the channel, and with that criteria, I think that the only logical answer would be Juliet from Lollipop Chainsaw, which I feel like Juliet would be a top contender even if it wasn't for that criteria, because, like, listen, I would love to be a gorgeous, tall, blonde, magical chainsaw-wielding, professional zombie-slaying, cheerleading, world-saving light of delight, and I think that my life would be fulfilled. Sadly, I am almost none of those things, and so I would have to say Juliet. Juliet, hands down. But if you have any questions and would like me to answer them here on the channel, then you can head on over to Patreon and do just that. Oh, right. Before I forget. This has been The Unfinished Swan, and I'll always be just a video boy. Thanks for watching.